Hey, ZombieFreak21 here, and I want to discuss about today's rock music. Here's how I described today's rock music. Nothing more than random bullshit being thrown at you, and not to mention just stuff that doesn't really make any sense. And to point out, today's rock music is just about the image, which I'll get that later on in the video. But to start off, let's go into history. You could say rock music was pretty much badass, especially considering the sex, drugs, rock and roll era, which started around the 70s, between the 70s and the 80s. But you could say the sex, drugs, rock and roll era pretty much died out around the 90s. Because even though that model declined, there was still some good music. Case in point, Nirvana, Weezer, and I think there's the Blur. I could kind of go on, and of course that's when there came alternative rock. Now alternative rock has been around since the 80s, but it didn't get that much popularity until around the 90s. But alternative rock as well as independent rock is still considered as a good type of music. But of course, some good things kind of had to come to an end. Because unlike hip-hop, which had died out around the mid to late 90s, rock music pretty much slowly started declining around 1996. But of course, just like hip-hop, nobody didn't really notice. But truth be told, this whole mess started when the lead singer of Nirvana, Kurt Cobain, had committed suicide. I don't know if too many fans pretty much given up on alternative music because of his death, but that's kind of what happened. And some of the good bands pretty much just started leaving. And you could say because of these events, that's when these shitty boy bands have came along, such as Backstreet Boys, NSYNC, and 90 Degrees, which I'm glad they no longer exist. And I find this very amazing that Backstreet Boys is influenced by Motley Crue, considering that they don't even relate, the two genres of music don't even relate to one another. And not to mention, Motley Crue themselves even hate the Backstreet Boys. But that's beside the point. Now, when the 2000 era began, as I said, rock music still, even though it slowly started declining, there were still some good bands out there. Like the White Stripes. Then there came along Maroon 5. And there's the Vines. But that's beside the point. But really, rock music had really went down the shitter after, you could say after the year '04. Because now, today's rock music, of course, is all about image. Case in point, Fall Out Boy. But truth be told, the only real reason why most of these annoying ass fangirls like this band is because of Pete Wentz. And I find Pete Wentz the most stuck up attention whore out of them. He even took credit for him starting the band, which really was one of his bandmates, Joe Troman, that started. I was like, what a douchebag. And it's the same thing with My Chemical Romance. All about looks rather than talent. And as I said before, people, My Chemical Romance is pretty much emo. But of course, the lead singer just won't admit it. And of course, as I said, people, I hate emos. And not to mention, today's rock music is also too happy. And a prime example of this is Train. Now, Train, of course, has been around since the mid 90s, but nobody's never really heard of them, which was probably a good thing considering that everybody knew they've sucked from the start. But the only reason this band became popular is because it's people like my kid's sister who support their shitty ass music. And Hey Soul Sister is pretty much, of course, as I said, it's too happy. Not to mention the lyrics doesn't make any goddamn sense whatsoever. So Train's just one of the bands I find very annoying. So you can say rock music. I just don't know how to describe it. Cause this genre, I just don't know. Rock music, it pretty much isn't as hardcore as it used to be. That's why some of the good bands that've been around since the 80s, they pretty much left because even the lead singer from Motley Crue, Vince Neil, even admitted that he kind of had left for a while because he hated the downfall of music when the 90s era began. But I I don't know, because as I said, I haven't been a fan of rock music that long, but just like hip hop, rock music doesn't really have that much creativity as it used to. And it's obvious some of these people can't even really play an instrument. But before I go, there's one more thing I want to add about this. If you're familiar with the band called The Killers, Brandon Flowers even posted his honest opinion about Fall Out Boy and Panic at the Disco. He said that he basically stated that they're nothing more than attention hacks, and the only reason why they became popular is because by image. But and of course, Brandon Flowers did get lashed at, especially by Pete Wentz himself. And of course, this forced Brandon Flowers to apologize to them. But even though the guy apologized, I highly doubt that he isn't really sorry, and he's still sticking to his opinion, which I applaud him for it. But that's pretty much what I have to say. I'm sorry, Freak 21, and I'll see you next time.